The world loved Diana in a way it had never loved a royal before. And then, on an August night in Paris in 1997, she was gone. But Diana didn't just leave behind grief. In her final years, she had been playing a legal game the palace never saw coming. She had structured her estate to reach one specific person, and her family went to court trying to undo it. What Diana left behind wasn't just money. It was the most powerful thing she ever did, and the royal family is still feeling it today. You want to know the truth about how Diana's story really started? It started with a week of suffocating silence. She was born into one of the most powerful aristocratic families in England, and yet for 7 days, nobody cared to give her a name. Her parents weren't celebrating. They were mourning the boy she was supposed to be. To the Spencers, Diana wasn't a daughter. She was a biological failure. A year earlier, her baby brother named John had died just hours after birth. Her parents, John and Frances Spencer, were desperate for a male heir. And when Diana arrived, the disappointment was immediate and visceral. Her mother was sent to clinics on Harley Street to be poked and prodded by doctors as if she were a broken machine that had produced a defective product. When the family finally settled on Diana Frances after 7 days, the name carried quiet pain inside it. Frances honored her mother. Diana came from a distant Spencer relative who had once herself been considered a potential princess of Wales. She never made it. And now her name was being passed to a baby girl whose own family hadn't wanted her to exist. They named her after women who almost made it, women who came close but never quite arrived. And from the very first week of her life, that was already Diana's story. Close enough to matter. Never quite enough to be what they wanted. Despite the tension inside the home, Diana's early childhood appeared privileged from the outside. The family lived at Park House, a 10-bedroom estate sitting directly on the Royal Sandringham grounds in Norfolk, leased from Queen Elizabeth II herself. The royal family vacationed just down the road at Sandringham House. Diana played with Princes Andrew and Edward as neighborhood children. She called the Queen Aunt Lilibet. She grew up around polo matches, country estates, formal dinners, and the kind of proximity to royalty that most people could never dream of. But inside this home, the ground was already rotting. When Diana was 7, her parents' marriage collapsed completely. Her mother left. A brutal custody battle followed. In a moment that many historians still point to as deeply painful, Diana's own grandmother testified in court against her daughter to help ensure that Diana's father would win custody of the children. The ruling kept Diana with her father. She would later remember standing outside the house as her mother drove away, the sound of the car fading down the gravel driveway. It was the kind of moment that children remember forever. Then in 1976, her father remarried. Reine, Countess of Dartmouth. Diana didn't just dislike her stepmother. She loathed her. She saw Reine as a bully who had invaded their home. The tension was constant, raw, and completely unresolved. It got so physical that Diana once pushed Reine down a flight of stairs. This shy, quiet girl had a furnace of rage inside her. She was learning early that if the system tries to crush you, you have to find a way to strike back. In 1975, her father inherited the title of Earl Spencer, making Diana Lady Diana overnight. The family moved from Park House to Althorpe, the Spencer ancestral seat in Northamptonshire. New title, Grand Walls, but it felt like a tomb. And the emotional turbulence followed her straight through the front door. School wasn't an escape, either. She failed her O-levels twice and kept changing schools. But teachers noticed something in her that no exam could measure. She had the warmest smile and the kindest heart they had ever seen for a girl her age. She had a genuine instinct to show up for people. She won a school award for community spirit. While other girls were dreaming of parties, Diana was volunteering at psychiatric hospitals and scrubbing floors as a cleaner. What followed was a patchwork of quiet, ordinary work: nannying, cooking courses, teaching dance, cleaning jobs, hostessing at parties. A skiing accident knocked her off her feet for 3 months. Yet she kept going. In 1979, her mother helped her purchase a small apartment at Coleherne Court in Earl's Court as an 18th birthday gift. Diana shared the flat with 3 roommates and drove an old car through London. And for the first time in her life, something felt right. No custody battles, no cold stepmother, no grand estates hiding broken families behind their walls, just a small flat, good friends, and a life that was entirely her own. She was happy, genuinely, quietly happy. The kind of happiness she had spent her whole childhood searching for. But the system that had ignored her entire life had just noticed her. A prince needed a wife, and Diana Spencer was about to find out exactly what that meant. By 1980, Prince Charles, heir to the British throne, needed a wife. And Diana Spencer, the quiet girl from Sandringham who had spent her whole life feeling like she wasn't enough, suddenly fit every requirement the palace had. That's the part that makes this so painful. She wasn't chosen because Charles loved her. She was chosen because she fit. She was young, aristocratic, untouched by scandal, and quiet enough that the palace assumed she would stay that way. But before we get to Diana, we need to talk about the woman who was there first, because none of what happened to Diana makes any sense without understanding what Charles had already lost before she ever walked into the picture. Charles met Camilla Shand at a polo match in the early 1970s, introduced by a mutual friend. And from the very first conversation, something clicked in a way that rarely happens. Camilla didn't fawn over him. She didn't treat him like a future king. She laughed at the same things he laughed at, spoke to him easily, naturally, like a woman who saw the man before the crown. Charles was completely taken. He began calling her constantly, but the palace had other ideas. Camilla didn't meet the unspoken requirements for a royal bride. She lacked the right pedigree, and crucially for the 1970s, she wasn't a virgin. So the institution did what it always does. It intervened. It pushed them apart. Charles was sent off to the Navy. Distance crept in, and Camilla drifted back toward a former boyfriend named Andrew Parker Bowles. By the time Charles returned, she had accepted Andrew's proposal. Charles was devastated. He wrote letters desperately begging her not to go ahead with Andrew, mourning what he called a blissful 6 months that fate had cruelly cut short. Camilla married Andrew anyway on July 4, 1973. But the marriage didn't end what they had. It just changed its shape. The physical side of their relationship quietly resumed not long after, even with both of them now building separate family lives. Andrew knew. He didn't interfere, and the palace said nothing. Then in 1977, Charles met Diana Spencer. She was 16. There was no romance, no spark. Charles was actually dating her older sister Sarah at the time. Diana was just background, a shy teenager orbiting royal spaces without knowing she was about to be pulled into the center of all of it. By 1980, Charles looked at her differently. She was beautiful, scandal-free, and the press was already circling. The palace needed the story to move forward. So it did. They announced their engagement in February 1981. The world went wild, but the cracks were already there before the ink dried. When a reporter asked if they were in love, Diana said yes immediately. Charles paused and said, "Whatever in love means." They had met each other just 12 times before getting engaged. They married on July 29, 1981. 800 million people watched. It was called the wedding of the century. There was a brief window of peace, the births of William in 1982 and Harry in 1984, where Diana said they were the closest they ever came to happiness. But by 1986, the three of us in the marriage became an official reality. Charles and Camilla went back to each other, and the palace just let it happen. Diana didn't just sit in a corner and cry, though. She did something the royals weren't prepared for. She fought back with total, terrifying honesty. She eventually cornered Camilla at a party. Diana told her straight out, "I know what's going on." Camilla's response was chillingly dismissive. She told Diana she had everything, the kids, the fame, the world at her feet. What more could she want? Diana's reply, "I want my husband." She made one thing crystal clear. She wasn't an idiot and she refused to be treated like one. By 1992, the war went nuclear. Secret tapes of intimate phone calls between Charles and Camilla leaked to the press, including the infamous Tampongate recording, a conversation so explicit that Charles was heard telling Camilla he wished he could be reincarnated as her tampon just to stay close to her. It was broadcast globally. It humiliated the future king completely. Diana then collaborated on a tell-all book with Andrew Morton that stripped the gold plating off the monarchy. The hits didn't stop. In 1994, Charles finally went on television to admit the affair publicly, naming Camilla by name. Most people would have gone into hiding, but that same night, Diana stepped out in a skin-tight, off-the-shoulder black silk dress, the revenge dress. She didn't follow protocol. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a woman who had just realized she was stronger than the crown. She wasn't finished. The following year, she sat down for her BBC Panorama interview. She sat calmly in front of the camera, looked the world in the eye, and delivered the line that haunts the palace to this day. There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. The divorce was finalized on August 28, 1996, and with it came something that cut deeper than the end of a marriage. They stripped her of her Royal Highness title. They cut her off. She was no longer a working royal. She was an outsider again. But here is why this matters to the story we are telling today. Diana didn't walk away from that marriage broken. She walked away with knowledge that helped her for the rest of her life. She entered that marriage believing in the fairy tale. She left knowing exactly what the institution was, a system that picks people for the roles it needs filled, uses them completely, and disposes of them the moment they become inconvenient. She wasn't just betrayed by a husband. She was betrayed by an entire machine that watched it happen and did nothing. And a woman who had just survived the most public humiliation in royal history wasn't about to go quietly. Instead, she did something far more dangerous than confronting Camilla or sitting down with the BBC. She started rewriting the rules of the institution itself from the inside, one quiet rebellion at a time. Most people fight institutions loudly, protests, confrontations, public declarations. Diana did something far more dangerous. She just quietly stopped following the rules, one by one, and by the time anyone noticed, she had already rewritten them. It started before the wedding. Despite being Lady Diana Spencer, daughter of the 8th Earl Spencer, she had worked ordinary jobs in London, nannying, teaching nursery school, cleaning houses. Royal women weren't supposed to do that. They were meant to arrive untouched by ordinary life, pristine and unworked. Diana arrived with dirt under her fingernails and real-world experience in her bones. She became the first royal bride in history to have held a paying job before her engagement. The palace didn't know what to do with that. Then came the ring. Instead of following royal tradition and commissioning a custom piece, Diana chose hers straight from a catalogue, Garrett's Catalogue, the official jewelry house of the British royal family, the same establishment that had crafted pieces for the crown for over a century. Choosing from their catalogue rather than requesting something bespoke was unheard of. Diana picked what she loved anyway, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, simple as that. That same ring sits on Catherine, Princess of Wales' finger today. Kate is rarely seen without it. At the wedding itself, Diana removed the word obey from her vows. The controversy was immediate. Other royal brides would continue vowing obedience for years afterward. Diana had drawn a line, and eventually, both Kate Middleton and Meghan Markle crossed it the same way she did, leaving obey out of their own ceremonies entirely. Then she redefined what it meant to be a royal mother. Before Diana, royal births happened privately at home or inside palace walls. Even Queen Elizabeth II delivered all 4 of her children that way. Diana was the first royal woman to give birth in a hospital, choosing St. Mary's Hospital in London. William and Kate would later do the same with all 3 of their children. Inside the palace, raising young royals was traditionally left to nannies. Diana refused that distance completely. In March 1983, she took 9-month-old William on an official tour of Australia and New Zealand. Nobody had ever done that before. She pushed for William to attend public school, making him the first heir to the throne to sit in a classroom alongside ordinary children. She wanted playgrounds instead of palace corridors, McDonald's and theme parks instead of state banquets. She wanted her boys to know that the world was bigger than their titles. While other royals kept stiff upper lips, Diana spoke openly about pain. When her marriage collapsed, she didn't hide behind palace walls. She sat in front of a BBC camera and told the entire world exactly what had happened inside that marriage. She owned it completely. And then there was the moment that perhaps said more than any interview ever could. In 1987, at the absolute height of the AIDS epidemic, Diana walked into a London hospital and shook hands with an AIDS patient. No gloves, no hesitation. At a time when people genuinely believed you could contract the disease through touch, when fear was consuming entire communities, Diana reached out her bare hand and held someone else's. This gesture changed public perception more than 1,000 government announcements ever did. Years later, Harry took a public HIV test alongside Rihanna in 2017, carrying his mother's work quietly forward. Diana also refused to hide her suffering. When Andrew Morton revealed in 1992 that Diana had been living with bulimia, she didn't deny it. In her own BBC interview, she explained it plainly as a symptom of what was happening inside her marriage. Her sons would later follow that same path, speaking openly about mental health in ways the royal family had always buried in silence. Every boundary Diana crossed became a doorway for the people who came after her. She didn't just wear the crown. She quietly dismantled what wearing it was supposed to mean. After the divorce was finalized in August 1996, Diana was no longer bound by palace protocol. She was rebuilding her life entirely on her own terms. She had fallen deeply in love with Hasnat Khan, a heart surgeon. It was a relationship she kept so intensely private that friends said it was the most real relationship she had ever had. When that ended, she began seeing Dodi Fayed, son of Egyptian billionaire Mohammed Al Fayed. The summer of 1997 was full of photographs. Diana and Dodi on yachts, laughing in the Mediterranean sun, unbothered, alive in a way the public hadn't seen from her in years. The palace was watching. The world was watching. And Diana was living louder than she ever had before. Then on August 31, 1997, everything stopped. The details of that night in Paris still feel like a fever dream. Diana was only 36 years old when the Mercedes carrying her and Dodi entered the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, pursued by a swarm of paparazzi whose camera flashes were the last thing she ever saw. The car hit a concrete pillar at high speed, claiming the lives of Dodi and the driver, Henri Paul, while her bodyguard, Trevor Rees-Jones, was the sole survivor. The news didn't just break. It shattered the global psyche. By the time the sun rose over London, the gates of Kensington Palace were already disappearing under a mountain of flowers. It was a scale of mourning that defied logic, a collective primal scream from a public that felt they had lost their own sister, their own daughter. But the image that truly stopped hearts was this: two boys, William, 15 years old, Harry, 12, walking behind their mother's coffin through the streets of London, heads bowed, faces unreadable, one foot in front of the other while the entire world wept around them. Harry would later write about that day in his memoir Spare. He said it didn't feel real. He said he didn't cry. He couldn't. And he felt as if the eyes of the entire world were on him, so he simply had to keep walking. Charles flew to Paris to bring Diana's body home. The Queen remained at Balmoral, a decision that drew immediate and ferocious public criticism. The pressure on the palace to respond to the nation's grief was unlike anything it had faced before. Eventually, the Queen returned to London and addressed the nation on television. For a monarch defined by emotional restraint, it was a moment that felt almost impossible to imagine. Diana's funeral was held on September 6, 1997 at Westminster Abbey. An estimated 2.5 billion people watched worldwide, making it one of the largest television audiences in history. Elton John performed a rewritten version of Candle in the Wind. It became one of the best-selling singles of all time. Her brother, Charles Spencer, delivered a eulogy that didn't just mourn Diana. It cut directly at the royal family. He stood in that abbey and pledged publicly that the Spencers would make sure William and Harry's souls would not be immersed by duty and tradition, that they would remain their mother's boys. Diana was buried at Althorpe, the Spencer ancestral estate in Northamptonshire, on a small island in the middle of an ornamental lake. And everything she had built, everything she had planned, everything she had quietly written down, was now frozen exactly as she had left it. Behind the global mourning, behind those two boys walking in silence, Diana had left something else behind. A will, a letter. And while millions laid flowers at palace gates, a very different process was quietly beginning behind closed doors. Because Diana had left something behind that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with power. Everyone assumed it would be straightforward. Diana was one of the most famous women in the world. Surely her estate was carefully structured, legally airtight, handled by the best people money could buy. Surely the palace had made sure of that. It hadn't. Diana's will had been written in 1993, during her separation from Charles. At the time, she had recently inherited £5 million from her father, and that money formed the foundation of the document. She listed William and Harry as her primary beneficiaries. She appointed her mother and eldest sister as executors, and then she never touched it again. She never updated it after the divorce settlement in 1996, never revised it after receiving £16 million from Charles. 1 year after that settlement landed in her account, she was dead. Royal historian Marlene Koenig later noted that Diana's will was described by some as unimaginative, standard, and even sloppy. And because Diana was no longer a working royal at the time of her death, it wasn't kept private the way royal documents typically are. Her finances became public record. The entire world could see exactly what she left behind. By August 1997, Diana's estate was valued at just over £21 million, roughly $31.5 million at the time. That figure included cash, investments, jewelry, clothing, and the £16 million divorce settlement. William and Harry were set to receive the bulk of it. But once taxes and legal fees were applied, nearly half of that inheritance simply disappeared, gone before her sons ever saw a penny of it. But it gets worse. Under UK law, Charles had the legal right to reclaim that £16 million divorce settlement entirely. The reason? Diana had died within a year of receiving it, which triggered a specific legal provision allowing him to take it back. If he had done that, William and Harry would only have been taxed on the £5 million Diana inherited from her father. Charles could then have reinvested the larger sum separately for his sons, protecting far more of it. He didn't. He was advised to leave the full amount inside Diana's estate and let it be taxed. The result was millions lost that could have been saved. Millions that belonged to two boys who had just lost their mother. Even what remained wasn't handed over cleanly. Alongside the main estate, a discretionary fund was created for the princes and their future families. Around £100,000 went into that fund, with the interest continuing to benefit them over time. Today, with both brothers married, their wives, Catherine, Princess of Wales, and Meghan Markle, are also entitled to draw from it. But Diana had left something else behind that almost nobody knew about. The day after she signed her will in 1993, she wrote a private letter of wishes. It wasn't legally binding, but it revealed exactly what she had intended. In it, Diana asked that 75% of her jewelry and personal possessions, referred to in UK law as chattels, be divided evenly between William and Harry. She also expressed a quiet hope that their future wives would one day wear her pieces. That part, at least, came true. William proposed to Kate using Diana's sapphire engagement ring. Kate has since worn Diana's tiara and sapphire earrings on multiple occasions. Meghan appeared in Diana's diamond Cartier bracelet during her explosive interview with Oprah Winfrey. But Diana's letter went further. She asked that the remaining 25% of her personal property be given to her 17 godchildren, meaningful keepsakes, something to remember her by. That never happened. Because the letter carried no legal weight whatsoever, the executors of Diana's estate, her own mother and eldest sister, chose to ignore that request entirely. Instead of receiving something personal and significant, the godchildren were handed what some later described as hollow mementos, hunting figurines, crockery, coffee service items. Diana had tried to reach everyone. Only her sons truly benefited. The rest of Diana's estate was placed into a trust called the residuary estate. Diana's intention had been clear. William and Harry would access it when they turned 25. That didn't happen, either. The executors applied for a legal variation called a deed of arrangement, pushing full access back by 5 years. The brothers could receive interest from the trust at 25, but the principal itself remained locked until they turned 30. By the time they finally gained full control, each son received approximately £10 million. Even Diana's most symbolic possession followed its own complicated timeline. Her wedding dress, designed by David and Elizabeth Emanuel with its dramatic 25-foot train, didn't go directly to her sons. 4 years, it belonged to Diana's brother, Charles Spencer, displayed annually at Althorpe and loaned to museums and exhibitions around the world, raising money for charity. It was only on Harry's 30th birthday in September 2014 that the gown finally passed into the hands of Diana's sons. In 2021, it appeared at Kensington Palace as part of a royal fashion exhibition. After Diana's death, each brother was allowed to choose one personal item from her belongings at Kensington Palace. William chose Diana's Cartier Tank Française watch, a gold timepiece her father had originally given her. After the divorce, Diana had worn it constantly. William believed she would want him to have it. Harry chose the sapphire and diamond engagement ring. But the brothers made a quiet pact between themselves. Whoever married first would use it to propose. When William was ready to ask Kate, Harry handed it over without a second thought. And when Harry later designed Meghan's engagement ring, he placed 2 diamonds from Diana's personal collection on either side of the center stone. Her presence woven quietly into both of their futures. One thing many people still get wrong: William and Harry did not inherit Althorpe, Diana's childhood home and the place where she is buried. Althorpe is the ancestral seat of the Spencer family. It will pass to Diana's nephew, Louis Spencer, not to her sons. Diana's money went to her boys. Her home did not. By this point, the 2 brothers' financial paths had already begun to